Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the national anthem. That was members of the Avenue Jazz Choir from Waukee High School. Now, please direct your attention to the screens. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the president of EO Iowa, Todd Mendenhall.
Good morning. Well, I'm very excited to have you here today. We've got a fabulous event today with Jack Trout, Differentiate and Die. I spent last night at Drake with Jack and this morning, and I can tell you that he's full of wisdom since 1969, the year I was born, by the way, Jack, just so you know. Yeah, just wanted to throw that in, Jack. I want to go through a few thank yous this morning, so if you'll be patient with me. It took a lot of work and effort for us to get here, and I want to make sure that we recognize those people. EO Iowa, I'll go over in a little bit, but ABI, Associated Business and Industry, Mike Ralston's going to speak a little later about that, are the presenting sponsors here. And I certainly want to go through the rest of our sponsors here real quick. CIRRUS, Center for the Industrial Research and Services, Minter Group, which provided all of our collateral, thank you. NAMA, National Agri-Marketing Association, the Volt Workplace Solutions, I saw their table back here, the City of West Des Moines, Taro International, Roe Crosby, and Innovative Grants with Tracy Fuller. So if we could just give them a round of applause, that'd be great. We also have a few member leaders here that I really need to recognize that really were the crux of this event. Carrie Storjahan, all of our collateral PR. Carrie, please stand up, take some recognition. Thank you. And Tracy, I think Tracy from Innovative Events, also an EO Iowa member leader. Is Tracy here somewhere? Oh, there's Tracy. Thank you, Tracy. And really our backbone of our organization is Tammy Michelson, our chapter administrator. She's very expensive and very busy. I want you to know that, and she's back here in the corner. Thanks, Tammy. EO Iowa, for those that are new to EO, really we're an education-based organization. We work the totality of the entrepreneur, which is health, family, workplace. So EO Iowa serves an education-based purpose for that. It's not a reciprocity or a business type setting. It's all about education and learning. So to be an EO, you got to be a founder, co-founder, a majority shareholder, and meet a sales requirement. So EO Global has about 140 chapters. We have about 10,000 members. I served on the global board in 2007, 2010, so it's very near and dear to my heart. We started the Iowa chapter in 2000. We have about 45 members with, roughly speaking, about $28 million average sales. So it's all about entrepreneurs from A to Z, their health, their wealth, their education. And so we have a table outside if you want to learn more about EO. Certainly there's a lot of EOers in this room. Please just stop one of us. But we do a lot of work beyond that. We have a fellowship or mentorship program that my friend Jason Berger runs, which is a give back for us to give back to the next stage of entrepreneurs. You know, when we were growing up, or when I was growing up, we didn't even have the opportunity to think we could own our own businesses. Now you can major in entrepreneurship at many of our state schools, and at least they have the possibility of thinking that they could be own their own business and create their own wealth. So entrepreneurship is alive and well. We're alive and well here at EO Iowa, and I'd encourage you to reach out to one of us to learn more about the organization. So enough of me. I'd like to really get going. I know you're not here to see me. Jack is anxiously waiting here. So I want to introduce Mike Wagner. Mike is runs the White Rabbit Group, which is a really fabulous ad agency group. He travels the world for it, speaks and trains across the nationship on leadership, creativity, and personal development. Mike is a local guy. I want to introduce you Mike Wabbit with the White Rabbit Group, our MC for the day. So thank you, Mike.
Well, good to be here today. Excuse me. Good to be here today. And my day's already been made. And I'll tell you what happened. I was out talking to some people, greeting some people at the tables. And Jack, I shook their hand, and they said, "Are you Jack Trout?" And I said, "Why, yes, I am." That didn't last very long. I had a mic on, that's why they thought that. But I'm very happy to introduce Jack to you. You wouldn't be in the room if you didn't know who he is. When I graduated from grad school, one of the very first books I read was Positioning that Jack wrote with Al Reese. And it was a mind-blowing, category-destroying kind of book. And I've been a fan ever since. Not a fan in the sense that, like a Beatles fan, but more of a fan in the sense of, here's a person that's informed my work, changed how I work, and gave me a vision for how I could grow and succeed in a hyper-competitive world. And if you don't know Jack's work, what he's shared, his wisdom, you will today, and I think you'll have the same kind of mind-blowing, category-destroying experience. So here's Jack Trout.
Hey, good morning. 1969. You got a lot of years to catch up. That's the problem. All right. I'm going to take you today for a trip around the world, actually. I'm going to be talking about a lot of my principles, but essentially it's going to be how these principles are playing out as you travel around the globe. See if we got this thing going properly here. Okay. Let's start with Peter Drucker, who was the father of business consulting. Now, a lot of people, you may or may not have read a lot of his books, but there was one paragraph really in his books that really, I think, were brilliant and summed it all up. He said, the purpose of a business is to create a customer. And the business enterprise has two, and only these two basic functions, marketing and innovation. Marketing, innovation produce results. All the rest are costs. Marketing is the distinguishing, unique function of the business. What makes you different versus your competition? So that is brilliant advice, a lot of which has been lost in the shrouds of history. Because it's a basic fact of business today. The global economy is the driving force in the world today. Companies and countries' success or failure really depends on how well they sell whatever they have to sell. It is a tough world. And when I started all this in 1969, there wasn't a level of competition that exists today. It was, are you kidding me? You know, you lose your business, you get it back. Today, you lose your business, you don't get it back. It's that tough. And all the world really has become a marketing problem. Whatever you're selling, it's a marketing problem. And essentially, the basic need to survive is positioning strategy in a very competitive world. So you do have to understand how positioning works and how, because it's how you win or lose in the mind. And it's all about, in many respects, differentiation. How do you differentiate yourself in the mind of your customer and your prospect? Now, a book about strategy was Differentiate or Die. Basically, I wrote this book after positioning because I discovered that if the definition of positioning is how you differentiate yourself, a lot of people didn't really understand how to do this. So this is really the basic book about how you separate yourself. Now, marketing's big problem today is what we call creeping commoditization. And this has been going on and on for a number of years as more and more categories get commoditized. And here's some hard numbers. In a list of 75 categories, 21% of the measured brands had any points of meaningful differentiation. That's 10% less when this 2003 loyalty index benchmark was established. So slowly but surely, more and more categories are being commoditized. And what's causing a lot of it out there is what I call meaningless slogans. Start something. These are things that I just plucked out of magazines and whatnot. Welcome aboard, really. You know, people drive us. Well, you know, I can't see animals driving us. Expanding possibilities. This is real stuff, folks. I didn't make these up. Differentiation is not sloganeering. You got to be careful. We're not after a slogan. Banks are the worst. It's hysterical. Where money lives, can you imagine? These are true. Where money lives. Embracing ingenuity. The clean Swiss bank, true story. I mean, I didn't know there was a dirty Swiss bank. The power to do more, okay, how about more interest? No. Whatever makes you happy, more interest? I'm sorry, we're not going to do that either. So in other words, the banking world has really been trapped in a lot of meaningless slogans. I love this, here today, here tomorrow. Well, I would hope so. You do have my money. So this is the kind of stuff that slowly but surely commoditizes a category. In a recent study, a wide variety of categories, the banking sector had 0% differentiation. Meaningless slogans, endless merges have totally commoditized the category of banking. So I hope none of you guys are in the banking business, but essentially, that's what's happened to one category. Now, interesting enough, against the tide, after years of shutting branches, laying off tellers, nations' banks are trying to do something, desperate to lure new customers, customer service. This is a Wall Street Journal article. And a guy named Vernon Hill, who was the CEO of Commerce Bank, small regional bank in New York, he said, we're going to provide all the convenience and the service factors banks have neglected or destroyed. So essentially, he changed the game. And he set out to own a basic attribute, America's most convenient bank, the Commerce Bank. He wanted to essentially build a bank around the attribute, the difference of being convenient. And of course, to do this, he had to change the way he did business. In other words, America's most convenient loans, and he had morning hours, evening hours, multiple drive-through lanes, free checking, et cetera, et cetera. He said, I am going to make this truly a convenient deal. And he changed his hours, very convenient. Banks were pretty rigid on hours, and he said, no, I'm going to be open all the time, all kinds of hours. Along comes the J.D. Power survey, and essentially they get ranked #1 in customer satisfaction. In other words, become convenient suddenly played very well with his customers. And they essentially ranked #1. And of course, what was the bottom line? Well, essentially, he ended up with 460 locations on the East Coast, 2.4 billion customers, 48 billion in assets, fastest growing mid-sized bank, and branch deposits were growing 4 times the industry average, and he had a 15% annual growth rate for 5 years. So, in other words, he set out to be different. He did what was necessary to make that difference real, and he's had terrific results. Now, let's get to the slogan or difference thing. In other words, Nike, just do it. Now, people say, I like that line. Well, it's a meaningless slogan, really. If you want to understand what Nike's success is, their difference is really what the world's best athletes wear. That's really what drives, and they spent a fortune on putting that little swoosh on the world's best athletes. They bought LeBron James in high school for $70 million. In high school. And what they've done is they've done it not verbally but visually. I mean, here's 2 of your best. You have Federer and Nadal. Both have that swoosh on. So in other words, what Nike has really pulled off is essentially they built that idea of what the world's best wear by essentially spending a lot of money on putting that swoosh on the best athletes in the world. Now here's our friend McDonald's. I'm loving it. I'm not loving that slogan. And the difference really of McDonald's, I mean, it's sort of tucked away in the bottom of their sign. They don't keep track of it all the time now, 99 billion served. Really, what McDonald's should be saying is very simple, the world's favorite place to eat. That's exactly what they are today, because they're all around the globe. And that is a very simple but powerful leadership idea. And they're just, and that's a great umbrella to talk about the different things that they have there. New Zealand, terrific country. They created a few years back the world's newest country. Is that the silliest idea? I don't want to go to a new country. I want to go to an old country. That's where the interesting stuff is. And if you spend any time down there, you'll discover their point of difference is very simple. The 2 most beautiful islands in the world. Believe me. It is, you cannot find 2 of the most dramatic-looking islands. Just here's a couple of visual proof if you want to see, what New Zealand can look like. The North Island's on the right, South Island's on the left. So in other words, this is the kind of thing you have to look for. What's my point of difference? How do I bring it to life? Australia, I love this one. Where the bloody hell are you? Well, I'm not in Australia, that's for sure. It's a long way to go. What makes Australia worth a visit? Very simple. The wonders down under. They actually had that line, and they dropped it years ago, and essentially, that is really why you go to Australia. And here's 2 visual wonders. There's kangaroos, koala bears. In other words, they do have some very interesting stuff down there. You won't see any other place. A lot of it will kill you. You got to be careful, but it's still a neat place to go. Now, let's start with differentiation via price. Price is a tricky game. Back in Rome, a guy really nailed it. He said, a thing is worth whatever the buyer will pay for it. That's exactly what a good definition of price is. And it was the 1st century BC. But here's your problem. Why price alone is a trap. It's a pencil. And the reason it's a trap is your competitors all have pencils. They can drop their price as fast as you drop your price. So in other words, it can become a vicious circle to the bottom. Now, you go to Southwest Airlines, which I consider a very simple success story. A lot of people kind of think a lot of it was driven by prices, but it's not true. If you talk to Herb Kelleher, who I worked with years ago on this thing, you say to Herb, what's your success? And he says, be different. And essentially, a lot of people don't appreciate how different he built his airline. He said, I want one kind of airplane. He said, too many kinds of airplanes, it's just too expensive to maintain. He said, I want no lousy food. In fact, no food at all. What you save on Southwest, you can spend at a gourmet restaurant. No loading of food keeps my costs down. He had no assigned seats, reusable boarding passes. That means no groping for seats, no overbooking. Walk on, plane takes off. Reservation systems are expensive, he said. I don't want to do that. And I don't go through hubs. He said, planes fly direct to where you want to go, not where we want you to change planes. Flying shortest distance between 2 points saves fuel and time, and so the airplane doesn't have to charge as much. So what he did is create a different type of airline. And it was a bit of a cattle car, so he kept things funny. If you fly in Southwest, the stewardesses will do stand-up, the pilots will do stand-up. So he makes the experience a little bit more enjoyable. So in a way, Southwest really is a different kind of airline. Yes, the prices are not bad, but it's still the difference. So it's the really bottom line. It's not it's not knowing your customer. It's what your customer knows that makes you different. That's the key here. That's the essence of success. You know why your customer looks at you and thinks that you're a little bit different. Okay, now we're into the game of how do you do it? Well, let's start with differentiating yourself via attribute. Here's the psychology. Researchers say every person's a mixture of characteristics, but being known for one characteristic makes that person unique. Einstein, intelligence; Marilyn Monroe, sexy. In other words, if you today you can see many examples of essentially people look at a certain person and they own an attribute. Researchers also say each product is a mixture of characteristics. So being known for one, makes that product unique. Crest, Volvo built their brand around safety, Crest, cavity prevention. In other words, successful brands, some of them own attributes. Visa, the #1 credit card in the world, owns the attribute of everywhere. Everywhere you want to be, you can use this card. A very powerful attribute for the credit card business. In the world of automobiles, some of your best brands, they own attributes. BMW, the ultimate driving machine, the drivability idea. Volvo built the brand around safety. That's how they really started it off, and they've gotten a little bad about some of that stuff, but that was what built the brand. Mercedes is really about prestige, and I think that's really what has always been their attribute. The cheap, small Mercedes, I don't think helped that concept a little bit, but that's where they are today. Toyota's always been about reliability. And again, that's what made the Toyota such a successful brand. Jaguar's about styling now. They're kind of mucking up the styling, unfortunately. It had a unique style, and that's changing. And it's always a problem with companies. They don't sometimes recognize that if they start to change things, they're going to change their attribute. And Ferrari's about speed. You want to drive 200 miles an hour? Hey, get a Ferrari. And that's always been about it. And they win races, et cetera. But that's really been the key to their success. Let's go interesting. Here's a company called Ball, which you've probably never heard of. It's an American brand, and it's got a Hong Kong owner, a guy named and Henry. And Henry is an interesting character. It's an old railroad brand, which most people were unaware of. The positioning strategy that I sort of helped him with is called accuracy under adverse conditions. What he had is a very, very reliable watch. And it was amazingly accurate, and even in some very difficult situations. And how do you dramatize it? Well, here's a watch for people who live on the edge, which is which is a true story. He's a rock climber. A watch for people that live in the curl, and this is a guy inside one of these gigantic waves surfing, and he has a watch on. It wasn't easy to find a guy with a watch on. And it's a watch for people who live on the slopes. In other words, he's got some great stories to bring to life the accuracy under adverse conditions as a way of differentiating his watch. And let's talk about, sometimes you have to sort of do a little bit of repositioning. And let's go to Spain, which is an interesting story. Spain's situation, you know, they really are the dominant vacation position in Europe. And it's being challenged by many other Mediterranean destinations that have sun, beaches, and lower prices. See, Spain's locked into the euro. And they need, so how do they counter their new competition, which is in the Mediterranean? So essentially, in reviewing their tourism history, and this is the problem with tourism, it's always changing. You saw some examples of that with Australia and whatnot. They opened up with everything under the sun. That was their opening line. Everything new under the sun. Well, silly, but they did it. Passion for life. Now, I don't get that one. Bravo, Spain, Spain, March, smile your eyes, Spain, I need Spain. In other words, this is the kind of stuff that over the years, they kept changing. So they really failed to have a clear point of difference. Now, but what has stuck? Spain's climate and beaches has made them Europe's favorite vacation. It's number 2 in visits. Now, if Spain is everything under the sun, they should spend more effort on the attribute of everything. Sometimes people miss what they have to do. How do I broaden the perception? And essentially, all it says is go back to the future. Go back to that one line, everything under the sun, but spend a little bit more time, less on the sun and more on everything. In other words, some of the castles of historic Spain. In addition to the beaches, we have some amazing castles. Or, you know, some of the cathedrals of religious Spain, and there are some very interesting things to see in cathedrals. So they had great stories to tell beyond the sun. And of course, you don't walk away from the beaches. You know, some of the beaches of sun-drenched Spain. So in other words, you have to, sometimes it's a question of how do I, if I own this idea, how do I broaden it? How do I take advantage of it? But continuing to use that same simple idea, everything under the sun. In other words, another point about this game is use it or lose it. Once you start focusing on your attribute, you run the risk of becoming nothing. See, you got to hang in there. You got to stay with what you are, which you just saw as an example of everything under the sun. AIM is an interesting toothpaste that once had a 10 share. And essentially, they had a very powerful story, good attribute, good taste, good tasting toothpaste. And the way they sold this, they went to the parents and they said, your kids will brush their teeth more because it's got a good taste. And the parents said, yeah, that's a terrific idea. So that was really what built them up to a 10 share. Now, a 10 share in the toothpaste business is a lot of business. But then what happened? Well, then they lost focus. They didn't, it's that use it or lose it. They stopped using it, and they started to change the different types of AIM that were available. Regular strength, anti-tartar. They even changed the taste, mint. So today, they have 0.8 share. And essentially, that's what can happen to you. Once you drift away from what you really are, in your effort to chase other business, you can destroy yourself slowly but surely. Now, positioning has come to Indian agriculture. This is an interesting story because India is as you can imagine, is very big in the world of agriculture, but it's very different. It's not like your agriculture out here, where you have, you know, gigantic farms, gigantic pieces of equipment. First of all, there was the issue of this one company decided to preempt the attribute of longevity. In other words, this is a company that made pump sets in India. They put them out in the field and they just run and they generate, you know, water. And essentially, China arrived in India and they said, hey, we can make a cheaper pump than a company called Kirloskar, which is the Indian company. So the question is, so how do you build perceptions to counter our moves? In other words, quite often, you get a new competitor, you have to find a way to counter what the new competitor is doing against you. And this is a case of China, cheaper, up against an Indian pump set company. And essentially, so the best defense is a good offense. They should, I said, build the perceptions of reliability and longevity of your pump sets. This makes your pump sets worth the price. In other words, sometimes if a guy comes at you with price, you have to build a counter argument. And this argument was reliability and longevity. That's the way you counter. And of course, the focus on how their pump sets are built to be more reliable. Then you have to essentially tell your story. And this is a story. Here's a quality matters. Reliability is the reason why. And we talk about the different things that this pump set has, that why it is a more reliable pump. And they also focused on the longevity story. In other words, the fact that the pump sets last longer, making them cost less in the long run. So in other words, you move in on the attribute of longevity. And here's another, longevity matters, cost is the reason why. In other words, that thing will sit out there, and if it runs forever, it's going to be much more efficient. So you have to counter with moves, with essentially shifting your story. And of course, if you have a chance, sometimes you can use comparisons. And we laid out the comparison of the Chinese pump sets from an economic fuel-saving point of view. In other words, yeah, you can buy it cheaper, but we have essentially if you do a comparison, we do very well. And so it's comparisons matter. Chinese pump sets compare badly. So we did an absolute, one versus the Chinese. In other words, this is kind of how you have to play the game out there. You get attacked on price, you have to counter with essentially your story. And that's the way it is out there. It's a tough world. So all these messages were put into an integrated program in print, television, other forms that reach the target audience. In other words, once you do that, you have to pull it all together, and you got to build a very aggressive program, or else you're going to let the Chinese take away your business. Now, performance is another interesting story in this game. This is another same company. They had come up with a new tiller. Now you probably know what tillers are. Tillers are, you can't do a tractor. You do what the next step down in India is a tiller. And essentially, a lot of the Indian farmers like small tractors, and essentially this tiller was an interesting story. Introduces a machine that looks like a tiller but works like a tractor. They're called a Mega T. In other words, in essence, what you do is you sort of say, hey guys, here's an alternative for you. It's going to cost you less. It's going to much more efficient machine, and it does a lot of stuff that a small tractor, it works like a tractor, but and so you have enormous advantages here. Now, so let's move to what I call an interesting story. You've all read about Hank Greenberg and AIG, and here's a fascinating story which I had a ring seat for. I once visited Hank some years ago, and I was discussing the positioning strategy of AIG. At the time, their business was really international casualty insurance. That's what they did. And what I recommended to Hank, I said, what you should become is America's answer to Lloyd's of London. That's what you are. We have Lloyd's who does this kind of stuff, and you guys, and you do it, and you're America's answer. And it was interesting in that he wanted to be more than that. He wanted to be everything for everybody. He wanted to become the world's largest insurance company by adding other types of insurance, including life, automotive, and financial. In other words, he set out to become everything for everybody, which, believe me, can be an enormous trap for a smaller player. And because now you have to manage this monster. And the bigger a company it is, the harder to manage. I think you all have advantages of not being gigantic. Believe me, very hard to manage. And then, of course, the crash came. Several employees in England almost sank the company. When 2008 rolled around, a number of AIG-insured financial instruments crashed and burned. See, they were insuring financial instruments. And, of course, they all crashed, and AIG almost crashed with that thing. And that's what can happen when you stop focusing on really what you are and what you do very well and try to become everything for everybody. Of course, the bailout arrived. Government bailed AIG out. Hank was fired, and he lost a great deal of money. And now he is suing the government. You've probably read about his suits for his losses. It's a sad ending for trying to be everything to everybody. That's exactly what he's doing right now. And unfortunately, we now have a sad Hank. A very successful Hank to a very sad Hank. Now, how will he do in that suit? I can't believe he's not going to win that suit. But, you know, his ego is such that he really felt that the government didn't pay him enough when they bailed him out. But, you know, that's what happened. But he, believe me, this was a message of trying to be everything for everybody, and he really destroyed what had a very powerful but simple idea. All right, let's move away from the attribute game and talk about how it's made game, which can be a very good way to differentiate. Consumers believe that products can contain a magic ingredient, which will improve performance. Understanding how the ingredient works is not necessarily essential. Is there some magic? Crest, for its success, had Floristan. Nobody knew what Floristan really was, but it had less cavities. Terrific. Sony, for years, had Trinitron, which was nobody ever understood what Trinitron was. Nice picture, but, you know, that's what built the brand. There's a wonderful company called Living Proof Hair Care, small thing, but they have a magic molecule. I love that idea, a magic molecule. Louis Vuitton, I mean, this is the handmade idea. This is this beautiful lady sewing up this handbag. I challenge you to find any lady in their factory that looks like that. Trust me, they don't look like that. But hey, what can I say? Land's End, I love Land's End. I mean, they'd say, look, this is how it's made, and they tell you the story about quality matters. And this is what we do to make it quality. So in other words, you can build a very strong story about how you make a product. A few years ago, I did a lot of work positioning a pizza chain. This is the story of Papa John's. You've probably seen John on television. And it's who says little guys can't beat big guys. Now, John, I met him years ago, and he was having a lot of success with taste tests, but he couldn't quite define why he was successful. And it was a number of years ago. And what I discovered that John had a secret weapon. John was the only pizza chain using what's called fresh packed tomato sauce. It was a sauce made by a gentleman named out in California, Dino Cortopassi, who was essentially selling to the independent mom and pop pizza places around the country, and John bought his pizza, got his sauce. And it's interesting because it's a sauce that's not made from concentrate, which most sauces that pizza companies use is made from concentrate. And he got access to the sauce, and that's really what was essentially the position that he still uses today: better ingredients, better pizza, which is something I cooked up for him. Now, but here's a cute little story surrounding this idea. I had met Dino, the guy who makes this sauce, a little bit before I met John. And then I met John, and Dino had said to me, I don't sell to the chains. I just sell my sauce to the mom and pop pizza places. And I'm sitting with John Schnatter, and John is saying, well, I have Dino's sauce. And I said, you have this sauce? He said, oh, yeah. I said, can I make a phone call? So I called Dino. I said, Dino, I got a guy here who says he's a chain, and he's got your sauce. Is this true? What's going on here? He said, is that young John? I said, yeah. Yeah, he said, he has my sauce. I said, well, how'd that happen? He said, well, he started out as a mom and pop pizzeria, and he bought my sauce. But he started going to do a chain, so I kept selling it to him. So it was a wonderful, cute little story about how John stumbled onto this wonderful sauce and has built his brand around that idea. Ketchup, which is another interesting story. Venezuela, okay, you go to Venezuela, and the Venezuelan original ketchup is a company called Pampero. That was for years the #1 ketchup in Venezuela. But suddenly, this is what happens in this competitive world, the big ketchup makers arrived in Venezuela. Heinz, of course, Del Monte. So it became a very competitive world. So I was invited down to talk about Pampero with the people down in Venezuela. And I said, well, what's going on here? I said, you know, your sauce looks a little bit different. And he said, well, it's how it's made. I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, the big companies mash up all their tomatoes and turn them into ketchup. I said, okay. I said, what do you do? Well, we cut the skins off before we mashed them up. I said, "You kidding?" "Yeah," he said, we have a bunch of people taking the skins off, and that's why the ketchup looks a little bit redder than their ketchup. And I said, "That's an amazing thing." I said, "Look, there's your idea. Most recipes that use whole tomatoes call for removing the skin. You could exploit this without the skin perception of quality and taste. You should talk about that." And they said, "Well, yeah, but we got a problem." I said, "What's the problem?" "Well, we just bought the same machines that the big guys do. We're going to mash them all up with the skins on." I said, "Well, there goes your idea." I left town, and that was it, guys. You know, I don't know what happened to these guys, but it wasn't going to be good. It wasn't going to be. They had it, and there are times when you just can't emulate what the big guys do. Here's my favorite story. Fewer leaks. This is the science behind our unique one. This is Batesville Caskets had a leak-proof casket, and they had a science behind their leak-proof. This is amazing. It's a true story. And who cares? Well, turns out that the people who bury people care. That's the difference. They can't stand putting somebody down there with a leaky casket. And that was really the whole deal. Now, another cute story. I'm in their showroom, and they're showing me all these different caskets. And over in the corner is really a casket that you think this thing was so fancy, you think you could drive it out of the showroom. It was amazing. I said, "Who buys those?" He says, "That's the mafia. They don't like to bury their guys in cheap caskets. They have a whole line of upmarket caskets for the mafia folks," which is a true story. Yeah. So I couldn't believe it, but that's the way the real world works, guys. First, being first is an interesting story, if you can do it. Again, the psychology. People tend to stick with what they've got, and the status quo has a magnetic attraction. Psychologists refer to this as keeping on, keeping on. In other words, if you get out there, people get comfortable and they'll hang on. The first nighttime cold remedy. In other words, there was a lot of daytime, and they said, "Okay, we're going to be out with the nighttime." And essentially built an enormous brand about just focusing on nighttime. The first shaving gel was Edge. There was lots of shaving creams, and they came out with a gel, which of course you put it on your face, it turns into a cream, but it starts as a gel. Of course, the first coffee house, Starbucks, built an enormous brand around being first there. The first search engine, you know, Google. And the weapon of Google is it's now is what we call a generic brand. Google it. It's incredible. In the old days, it used to be Scotch tape it, Google it. If you can hit that, you've hit nirvana, believe me. If you can become a generic brand, you are on your way to, great success. The first champagne is Dom Perignon, still around, comes in a fancy green box. It's still there, and it was the first champagne. Leadership is a very, very powerful idea if you can pull this off. In other words, if you can establish yourself in a leader in a category. Could be a small category, but if you're the leader. What's the psychology? Leadership is the most direct way to establish the credentials of a brand. Credentials are the collateral you put up to guarantee your performance. Normally, if you're the leader, it's almost like a guarantee of your performance. People sort of say, well, they're number one, so they got to be reasonably good. Titleist. One of my favorite campaigns is number one ball in golf. Simple, direct, and that is a terrific idea. Let's go to Austria, because you can play leadership in a number of different ways. And in Austria, interesting story. And this is technology leadership. Sometimes if you have an interesting angle in your technology, you can build a story around that. Lenzing is a company in Austria that makes, we call it rayon here, but it's a rayon of viscose fibers. And they have a family of these viscose fibers. But in a global economy, if you don't have a positioning idea to differentiate your company, you better have a very good price. And they were up against the UK, they're up against China. There was a number of other people making viscose or rayon. Their initial strategy, and sometimes I get into a situation and I have to sort of say, no, that's not going to work. They were using high fashion, nature, yes, a day in the life of a Naomi, and they took a very fancy Naomi Campbell, a very fancy model, well known, and they kind of tried to build a story around fashion, which really wasn't going to make it. Fashion made no sense. Important attributes in buying a fiber: quality, delivery, and technical support. And essentially, when you looked at their perceptual scores, they scored very well in technology. And essentially, if you look at their perceptions, no, that's not coming through. Yeah, in other words, this is their perceptions in technology versus their competitors in blue. So in other words, they really had a very strong technological perception. And the reason is essentially they had enormous credentials in technology. They started in 1930, spun-dyed, high wet, flame. Oh, through the years, they created all different kinds of viscose fibers, and essentially, so in a way, they built up a very strong technological perception, and essentially that set up this position, the world's leader in viscose fiber technology. And that idea has played very well for them. You know, when you set out an idea, you have to, it's very simple, you got to set out what we call a coherent direction. Focus on leadership and bring that idea to life across all marketing materials and activities. Once you have an idea, you have to integrate it into everything you're doing. And essentially, this was some prototype advertising that, you know, I work with them on. It was, in other words, viscose fiber that gets better. Here they lay out all of their credentials, how they've improved the fiber over the years. You know, 66 years using technology to improve one of nature's best fibers. And essentially, here's introducing Visco XS. It's a stretchable fiber, which essentially, you know, enables you to extra strength design for today's high-speed machines. Model making other fibers, future fibers better. This is a blending idea. This essentially, it can be used as a blend in making different types of fibers. So in other words, sometimes if you have a story, you have to find ways to tell the story. And here's making the world a softer place. New generation offers softness plus strength. So in other words, it was how do you bring that idea to life? And how do you integrate it into all of your products and all of your activities? And here's your, on the other side, this is high purity viscose. This was used for hospitals and stuff like that, medical stuff. So you got an idea, you integrate it into everything you're doing if you can. They're now the worldwide leader in cellulose fibers. They've increased 240% in 8 years, and they dominate the third generation of cellulose fibers. So in other words, they have used this technology idea to really become the dominant viscose player in the world. China. I spent a lot of time in China. China is an interesting place in that suddenly the president of China has said to the entrepreneurs out there, and they have a lot of entrepreneurs, hey guys, we'll run the big stuff. You guys can do what you guys can do whatever you want with the other markets out there. And China has 1.3 billion people, so it's a big, big market. So they have adopted positioning with a vengeance. It's kind of an amazing place. I went to Beijing for the 40th anniversary of positioning. Can you imagine? It wasn't in the U.S. where it all started. It was in Beijing. I was introduced to their new positioning training school. They are graduating management that will use positioning principles to build brands. In other words, this is how they're graduating these entrepreneurs in their world. This was the first class of the positioning. Companies are the first class who were learning about all this stuff. This was the second class of entrepreneurs. And China's Harvard is called Peking University. Interestingly enough, I went over there and I essentially Peking University Business School, the first strategic positioning program, and essentially they used my material, and I signed this agreement with them to take my material and put it into their Harvard. And that's exactly what's happening today. And I'm going over in middle of December to sort of talk to the same group of entrepreneurs over there who are really getting into this kind of stuff. They have taken all my books. It's now called Trout in a Box. Every book translated, and they put it in a box. Trout in a box. You want a whole box of my books? That's what they have, which is kind of amazing. Here's some of their work. Attribute strategy, the ultimate house plant. And they talk about this plant and what it does. The leading house plant that sells millions. That's one of their marketing programs. Here's a leadership strategy. Miss you much? China's leading brand of jujubes. That's how they're using leadership there. And specialization. Where to find the perfect pair of pants. Ling Yu, specialist and leader in women's pants. So in other words, the Chinese are really, they're impressive. When they get into something, they really get it. They're not good at innovation. They're not good at inventing stuff. That has to come, and I've told them that. But they are really getting into the marketing side of the equation. One of my other favorite stories is Argentina. This is a funny story. And it talks about a willingness to change. And there are some times when you have to be willing to change because the market. We live in a world of barcodes, as you all know. And the barcode world is everywhere. How do you read barcodes? Well, there's a company in Argentina that makes barcode readers. That's all they do. It's an interesting niche, and here is one of their machines. Now, the company was called CompuData, but there was a lot of confusion branding between the corporate name, CompuData, and the product name, which is called Multiscan. That machine was called a Multiscan. And also there was the made in Argentina problem of technology perceptions. In other words, if you're selling a piece of technology, and if it comes from Argentina, that's a bit of a problem, because nobody sees Argentina as being a leader in technology, especially this kind of technology. So I essentially said to the owner of Multiscan, I said, why don't you position yourself as the world leader in laser barcode document reading? I think that's exactly what you got, laser barcode document reading. And do you mind if we move you to the US, away from Argentina? He said, well, we have an office in Miami. I said, okay, that's a start. So here's what it all began with. Roberto Martinez Taylor, Presidente CompuData SA in La Plata in Argentina. When he first arrived in my office, this is his business card. And I said, okay, now, Roberto, we're going to do some changing here. We're going to drop CompuData, and we're going to move you to use your product name Multiscan. And we're going to put the world leader in document readers, barcode document readers, right on your business card. And we're going to move you, if you don't mind. We're going to move you to Miami, Florida. And he said, okay. I went, well. So now you're in Miami, and you have a new brand name, corporate name. But we got one other problem, Roberto. He said, what's that? I said, your name. Your name is an issue. He said, what do you want me to change it to? I want you to become Robert M. Taylor, Chairman, Multiscan in Miami. So he said, all right, I'll do it. And that's what he did. And today, he has increased his sales 10 times, exports up 60%, and he now sells in 55 countries. And it's interesting. You know, he had a great idea, but he was willing to make the changes to give himself a much better platform to go forward into the world. So, 4 steps in the game, guys. 4 steps. Number 1, the competition. Arguments are never made in a vacuum. Always competitors trying to make points of their own. Your message has to make sense in the context of the category. Look, it's not what you want to do, it's what your competition will let you do. You have to understand that. It's a tough, tough world out there. Once you have a fix on your competitors and what you have to do, now, what's your differentiating idea? Looking for something that separates you from your competitors. Trick is to find that difference and then use it to set up a benefit for your customers. That's the deal. That's what you have to come up with. Credentials. To build a logical argument for your difference, you must have the credentials to support your claim of being different. You must be able to demonstrate your difference. In other words, it's not enough to just say, here's what, you have to be able to support it with some set of credentials. And then finally, you got to communicate that difference. If you build a product that's different, world isn't going to automatically be the path to your door. Truth will not win without some help. Every aspect of your communications should reflect your difference. So you have to build a communications program, which unfortunately will take some resources. I wrote a book called The 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing, and the 22nd law was the law of resources. Without proper resources, even the best idea will not get off the ground. That's the deal. So you have to be willing to put, to tell your story, so to speak. So, with that, questions and answers. See how easy all this stuff is, guys? All right. So let's let's get to the questions and answers before we'll do some workshop a little bit later on 2 stories. Anybody have any questions? You can turn the lights down a little bit. There we go. I can see you all. All right. Somewhere there's a question. Got to be a question. Boy, golly, you're all sold. Oh, we got one? What do we got? All right, get a mic.
Yeah, the number 22 is resources.
Resources, right.
How would you say the internet has changed that and leveled the playing field as far as
That's a very
meeting
good question.
resources?
First of all, everybody is rushing to the internet because it's cheap. It's free. I can get online. Hey, terrific. And here's your problem, guys. It is a lousy medium, the internet. Yes, you can use it, but it is not it's first of all, number one, it's a work in progress. People haven't quite figured out how to use the internet to build your story. Secondly, it's not a good interruptible medium. In other words, you watch television, you listen to radio, you look at billboards, newspapers. People, you can interrupt what people are doing to give them a message. We interrupt our program to give you a message from our sponsor. That doesn't work well on people hate to have their screens interrupted. They have all these things. They don't like this stuff flying around on their screens. So it is a very, very difficult medium to use effectively. And then the question is, how do I tell my story? How do I control my story? It's hard. To me, at best, it's a work in progress, how companies are figuring out how to use it. So it's a tool, but I wish you luck on trying to sort that one out. To me, it's a tough problem right now. Just using the internet to build a brand, very difficult. Yeah.
What is the best way for companies to come up with their list of differentiators?
You got to start with your competition. In other words, you got to focus on the competition. You got to avoid their strength, and find a way to exploit weakness. And so, I think the best way is to study the competition, and study the market, and see what's available. What opening do I have? Now, if you invent something and you're brand new, fine. You don't have to worry about competition. Then you have to get out there and tell the story as to why that invention is terrific. But you've got to start with the reality of there's a lot of competitors out there. And if you don't have any, you're off to a great start. But that doesn't seem to work out very often. It's just, and here's your other problem. If you get out there with success, you're going to have suddenly a whole bunch of competitors coming after you because you're going to say, hey, I can do that. So you have to figure out how to protect yourself. But it's a tough world. So I would say start with a very tight analysis of the market and your competitors. One over here.
What if you have a product that has a hook that brings them in, and that product line's doing well, but you have a new product that you want to keep so that you have recurring revenue?
Give me that one again. I've lost you.
So we have one product that we sell very well.
Okay, you have a winner. Okay.
Yep, but it's one and done.
It's one and done, right?
So we are developing another product to keep them on to get the recurring revenue. So how do you develop
a second product?
Dual messages, I guess.
Well, that's starting to get complicated. What you saw with AIM toothpaste was they had one product, good tasting toothpaste, and they said, no, I'm going to add other products so that I can get bigger. And what happens is you got to be careful with that second product. Does it begin to undermine the first product? How does it sell along with it? I mean, I can't answer that question without knowing more about it. But, and if going to use this, what brand name? Going to use the same brand name? Same company name? I mean, now you're into what I call the line extension trap. Now you're extending, and it's like AIM. You're beginning to weaken what the brand stands for, the one product. So my answer to you is do it with great care. If you're going to get into another one, you got to figure out where does that one fit. That's the deal. If it's a similar product with a different form, fine. If it's just, we're going to give you that same wonderful product but in a slightly different form, yeah, you can pull that off. That's easier. And that you see a lot of that. You know, we come in granules, we come in tablets, we come in liquid. I mean, it's, you know, it's the same product, but it's in different forms.
You're in a room, local businesses, and we're competing against the internet big time, right
Oh,
here,
yeah.
right here,
Oh, yeah.
center of the room.
Oh, here you are, right.
You're competing against the internet. We're all competing against the internet.
Yeah.
Does being local mean anything to the consumer?
Yeah, yeah. Again, the local thing is can be built into a point of difference. You know, depending on what the category is. But you're going to have to make a case for why local is good. That's going to have to be your strategy. How do I essentially say there's a reason that this local product is terrific, and it could be history, it could be heritage. We've been doing it here for a long, long time. I mean, there's a lot of ways to. You'll see that in the differentiator die book. There are ways of doing it, but again, it's very much dependent on the category. You know, what kind of a product, and whether you can build a very interesting story about. There's a very famous matzah in New York City. They bake and they have a very big competitors, national competitor, but they're very good maintaining their local thing. They talk about tradition. Matzah's Jewish. Tradition, very important thing. They talk about we bake them in the same ovens we've been doing for all these years. So in other words, they have built a whole thing around the localness of their matzah, which plays very well where they are, which is in the New York area, in Brooklyn. So in other words, there are ways to do the story, but you have to carefully craft a raison d'etre for the advantages of local.
Back here in the corner.
Where am I? Okay, over here.
So this is going to be a three-part question.
3 parts. All right, let's start with part 1.
How do you rebrand while in operation? How do you know when to pull the trigger? What signs should you look out for to see that it's gaining traction? And how do you make that healthy transition from the old entity or the old message to the new message?
Now, the answer to all 3 parts is with great difficulty. This is not easy, what you're undertaking here. The decision you're going to give me, what's the category? What kind of product are we talking about here?
Luxury product.
A luxury product.
Eyewear.
Eyewear. Okay, yeah, okay. And what are you trying to do?
Rebrand.
Rebrand. Why are you rebranding?
The price point is not reflecting the demographic at this point.
Okay.
It might be a logistical thing because it's based in Iowa.
Yeah.
And maybe the Louis Vuitton or those demographic that
Well,
might consume.
Rebranding or repositioning something is a tricky piece of work. I mean, you have to decide what's the brand name? Do I have enough resources to build a separate brand? Can I live with, you know, these are all, and now pulling the trigger, you know, somehow or other, if you can get out there and do a little bit of testing in some way, shape, or form, if you can find a place where you can go out there and try some of the things you're trying, that'll give you an indicator as to whether or not you should put a lot more money into it. I don't know. I mean, you're into some very tricky waters there when you're into that game, because you have to decide, what about my existing brand? Do I have to do a new brand? Do I have the resources? I don't know. It's a hard question to answer without really getting into the water.
So, good afternoon, Jack. My question would be, have you seen companies use insights to do a good job of differentiating?
What do you mean by an insight?
So delivering ideas to your customers that maybe others, your competitors, are not.
Well,
using.
that's, yeah. Well, yeah. Of course, if you can figure out something that was going to appeal to your customer, it's an insight, I guess you call it, that we can do. You can say, now look, if we do this, how will that help your business, et cetera? In other words, you can maybe pull out some of these things, you know, from your customer base and sort of say, yeah, if we could pull this off, We could, you know, we could make a lot of our customers happy or new ones happier because we've come up with a new wrinkle in service or something like that. So yeah, I mean, it's a question of studying, knowing the market, knowing what your competitors need and want. And if you have some new ideas, I would call them ideas instead of insights. You know, if you can find a way to test it out and see if how that would play with your customers, fine. You can do that, sure. It's just, how do I capture that idea? How do I verbalize it? And then how do I bring it to life? So yeah, it's helpful to have those.
Hi, I work at Drake University, and I'm also in the Masters in Communication Leadership graduate program there. And a topic that has often come up in the classroom is about the educated consumer. They're doing research on reviews before they buy a product, and you know, they want to know how their food is made, for example. What can you speak to if we should be proactive in educating those consumers before they make that purchase?
Well, you know, educating a consumer is half of what you're trying to accomplish with your story. In other words, I think the educated consumer makes life a little bit more difficult because, yeah, a lot of people go online and they get all this information. So it's any good, in a way, any good marketing program has a strong educational component to it. In other words, you're saying, what you're telling people is, look, here's what makes this product different. So in other words, I think it plays, but remember, it has to make sense. You have to have, as I said, the credentials to support that point, especially if you're dealing with an educated consumer. If you make a claim, you have to be able to support the claim. In the old days, we didn't have to worry about that as much. But today, because you can call them educated consumers, you do have to have very good credentials to support your point of difference. So you have to spend a lot of time on those credentials and how you deliver them to people. So yeah, it puts more onus on a company to come up with a better set of supporting ideas or credentials to support your story. Yeah.
Hi, you spoke some about being first and longevity as being an important attribute.
Being first, yeah.
While that is important to a company, how do you translate that to the consumer and make that important to them as far as the differentiator between yourself and your competitors?
Well, generally speaking, if you're first, you know, people will give you a lot of credit. In other words, in essence, you're the pioneer. You're out there first with it, and essentially, being first has a lot of positive psychology with it. You sort of invent the category. It's hard to, you know, in a way, you know, you just take Google. I mean, Google really is, you know, the ultimate first in the search engine business, and it's essentially very hard to knock them off, so to speak. People will give the pioneer, or the first one, a little bit more than they'll give the follow-ups, or the people who are playing the Me Too game. So you can always counter the Me Too players. But again, you're back to how do you, when you're the first one, you have to constantly be willing to attack yourself. You've got to be willing to come up with a new and improved idea. You can't just sit there on first. That's your opening gun, but then you have to get into introducing the new improved version. You constantly have to sort of improve or make your first better. If you can do that, you'll hang on. What I've discovered, I didn't bring along with me, but the leading brands in the United States, if you look at a bunch of big categories, you will find that the leading brands in the United States go back to the 1920s. The 1920s. There's only a handful of brands that essentially have replaced, I'm talking about big, broad categories, that have emerged. So in other words, in a way, it's a testimony for these companies who were out there first, built the business, and they're still there. They're still the dominant player in their category. So being first has an enormous advantages, but you have to continue to, new and improve, keep it going. Just do a good job, because you have a lot of competitors out there. They're going to try to knock you off. Yeah.
Good morning. I have a question that's a little bit opposite, I guess you
A little
could
bit
say.
awkward?
Oh, I'm sorry. Good morning. We have an organization. We have a positioning statement. We're working hard to work that positioning statement. And it seems to me there are times when everyone's ready to jump away from it so quickly that we can't get the positioning to work. How do you keep people to sit still long enough to let the positioning work?
Well, look, let me explain to you the reality of this stuff. I wrote in one of my books, when you're working on this stuff, you got to have the right people in the room. And essentially, the person in charge of building a strategy and a position and a brand has to be generally the head person. You got to have the CEO or who's ever in charge. He's got to be in the room, and he's got to understand it and buy into it and say, this is what we should do. If you just have a room full of people trying to sell their ideas, well, that's hopeless. That's difficult. So in other words, the real key to this game is having the senior people involved, understand it, aboard, and saying, okay, that's the deal. We're going down that road. And it's interesting because I talked about Papa John's. I laid out the better ingredients, better strategy thing at a room full of his marketing people and him and whatnot. And I'll never forget, he said, he looked around the room, he said, okay, now that's an interesting strategy. Anybody else have any thoughts? And we had a little argument here. And essentially he said, I haven't heard a better idea. Off we go. That's it. We're done. So in other words, he was able to listen and say, that's the strategy we're going to perceive. And he said, if anybody has a better idea, let me hear it. But I haven't heard it, so we're going to do this. And that's the way it has to work. It has to have somebody in that room who can eventually listen and then take charge. And then you'll find all of that people flying off in different directions tends to go away. It's the only way to do it. Yeah.
You talk about commoditization of products, and my business is the original of that. I sell metals that are listed on the London Metal Exchange. So our prices are published, and we can essentially lose business over 0.5% in price. What would be your approach for somebody like me?
Well, if you're in the commodity game, then what you have to do is build your point of difference around, it could be service, it could be technology, it could be delivery. In other words, you have to find the other attributes that aren't necessarily as product-oriented as service-oriented. In other words, they are things that we will make your life a little bit easier because we'll do this or we'll do that. So you have to focus on non-product stuff, which is commodity time, and focus more on the other things that a guy that he needs. And that's really what it comes down to. It's a question of it becomes much more service related. That's what you have. Everybody's making the same stuff. Who's got the best service? Or who's got the best support? Or who's got whatever? And you want to stay away from the price stuff because that's just a killer. That's the killer. And I think the more you can sell the fact that we have a service story to tell, the more people will be willing to pay a little bit more maybe for you. And that's the difference. What you're after is you're after a story that people will be willing to pay you a little bit more for that service or for that extra, as opposed to, all right, let's make it all on price. So that's the deal. Yeah.
Hi, Jack. I'll throw you a softball.
Oh, a softball. I like those.
Excuse me, I had to step out of the room for a minute, so if you've already answered this.
Yeah.
You watch Mad Men?
No. I'll tell you a cute story about Mad Men. One of the writers called me up and said, do you have any stories we could talk about in our show? And I said, yeah, I'll give you one. I gave him one story. And he said, do you watch the show? I said, no. He said, what he's discovered is, he said, guys your age who were there, they don't watch the show because this doesn't ring true. He said, it's funny because your age is, you were there, you did it, it was involved, but you're not buying into all this stuff, but I'll take your stories.
What was the story?
I had a story. I was working with a difficult character named George Lois. I don't know if you know him. George is one of the famous art directors in the business many years ago. And there's a great story about George, who he was making a client pitch. And the client, he said, here's what this ad will look like. And he showed him the ad. And the client says, what would that look like? How about if we can do that in half a page? And George, incensed, said, all right, I'll show what it looks like in half a page, tore it right in half, and said, there's your half a page ad, and walked out. True story. That's what George did. And, that was George. George was a wild and crazy guy.
I'm going to bring it back to a more serious question. Our organization is going through a complete transformation. We are re-identifying ourselves and coming up with a brand new entity. We're blending organizations and different verticals. We've got the right players on the board and people on the right seats, but what we're struggling with is how to make sure our 100+ employees are on board with the repositioning and the new direction. Do you have any best practices or stories or experiences that you could share to help with that?
Well, look, it's a good question, and it happens a lot. And what I tell people is this: look, when you work out a strategy, sure, you have to take that strategy to the marketplace, sure. But before you take it to the you got to put together a very well put together presentation for your employees. You got to do this. You got to sell them on what you're doing and why. In other words, that's what, a lot of companies miss that. They kind of think that if everybody will just automatically, jump aboard. That doesn't always work. So sometimes you have to sell your internal people as hard or even harder than the external people. So that requires working very hard on putting together that kind of a story. So they understand it. Guys, we're going from point A to point B, and here's why. And here's the rationale and whatnot. And let them discuss it. But at some point you say, we want you all aboard because it's critical that you're all aboard on this deal, and off we go. So you got to sell internally. That's a lot of people miss that. Oh, we exhausted the joint here?
Welcome to Des Moines. Just so you aren't the only one that feels old, I was walking in with an employee, said, have you ever seen Jack before? I said, I think 1978 you were in Des Moines with your positioning presentation. And
it could be.
Other person said, wait, that's the year I was born, so.
I get that a lot, as you heard this morning.
So my question is about naming. You mentioned Google. I'm just interested in your thoughts about all the companies now that are just picking words out of midair versus companies or brands that have a name that are somehow related to their point of differentiation.
Yeah, you talk about names, right? Names. Yep. Yeah, well, I've written this endlessly. What to name the product or service is probably the most important decision you're going to make, because it's the name that gets hung on that little hook in the mind. You got a good name, you're off to the races with your story. Roach Motel, the roaches check in, but they don't check out. Wonderful, wonderful name. If you can do stuff like that. Google is a very memorable name. What you want to name is easy to remember, and it doesn't necessarily have to be, like you think about Google, where does Google fit into search engines? It's a misnomer in a way. My sense is that if it's short, memorable, and the reason that a lot of people are going into stuff like that is it's hard to get names now. You can come up with a terrific name that really lines up with your product, and you go on to search it, and you discover that there's 16 guys that have the name. Names are like real estate today. If you got an existing name, you got to buy it from somebody if you want the name. That's just the way the world is working today. It's a tough situation, which is why people tend to get into make up new names. I mean, it's hard. The naming piece is a very tricky piece of work right now, primarily because they're hard to own, hard to find. So sometimes if you can create something, yeah, terrific. But that's what you're facing. That's why I like family names. Sometimes, those sometimes can be pretty good because nobody can take those away.
Hi.
I wanted to know what your opinion is on how you can leverage good news, things like awards and industry recognition, and help translate that into additional business for your organization.
It's like the Commerce Bank who won the J.D. Powers Award. Yeah, I think a lot of people can do, if you have a good award story, it's just more credentials. It's supporting credentials for why you're a good company or a good brand, whatever it is. It's just proof of performance. And the trouble is, there's an awful lot of, it sometimes gets overdone. But I think if you've won 4 J.D. Powers Awards and award, I mean, you can use that as a credentialing piece. So it's a question of how you use it and what your story is. But I think it's a very good way to sort of support why you're, what your point of difference is, or your company, or what you're doing. So yeah, I like awards.
Yes. Good morning, Jack. I've got a new product that I found has 2 or 3 different differentiating aspects to it, and I'm trying to decide as a startup which attribute is best to pursue in terms of a marketing campaign. Being limited on marketing budget, I have to figure out which aspect is best to pursue. I found that part of my customer segment, when I go and give my 30-second elevator speech, for example, I can't get to the attribute that really hooks them into my product without first talking about another aspect of the product. Do you have a kind of a guideline or a recommendation on how to pursue that to get to the attributes more quickly that the customer is more interested in hearing about?
Not really. Can't help you on that one. Hey, look, this is why this is a bit of a science. You're going to have to land on one, and then somehow or other land on one, but make the other attributes you're talking about as part of the story. In other words, there's got to be an overall idea, and then if you've got several other ones that, as you say, you had 3 of them, well, pick one as a starter, or one that you think is the best umbrella, shall we say, and then fold the other 2 into the story if you can. I'm not saying that's easy, but it's just, if I have three story points here, or 3 attributes, you got to somehow or other weave them into one story. That's what you got to do. So, and yeah.
Good morning, Jack.
Hi.
One last question, if you please. You spoke about the internal sale, and that normally is from the top down and making converts out of your sales force or the message tellers.
Right.
How important is for a company to make sure that that conduit flows back the other way and that you're listening to things that are happening at a grassroots level and from your sales force in order to maintain success?
Well, that's very important. I mean, you have to, in marketing warfare, I wrote about the importance of a general going down to the front to find out what's going on, to talk to, Sam Walton of Walmart's fame used to hang around the loading dock and talk to his guys in the loading dock and find out what's going on, what's moving, what isn't moving. He was a great, he would want to go down and find and talk to those people, because I think he realized that up on high, people tell you what they think you want to hear. It's a little bit different than when you go down to the troops and find out what's working, what isn't working, what their feelings are. So it's, yeah, I mean, I think that's getting down to the front, as we say, or finding out what's happening. A company has to, the head guy has to spend a lot of time doing that. It helps him get a feeling of where success is and what isn't, what's not going on, and what's wrong. So that's important. So yeah, I think you need that input. You can't just sit up there on top and guide things from afar. You really got to get good input, and sometimes it requires going out into the marketplace and getting it. Yeah.
Yes, Jack, thank you. My question really relates to the challenges of small and mid-sized companies versus the big box stores. Many of us are competing directly with large companies every morning when we get up. How do you recommend that leaders of small, mid-sized companies maintain the level of focus on their marketing and differentiation that big companies do? How do you avoid slippage? How do you avoid putting it on the shelf, forgetting about it for another 5 years? Just how do you keep that momentum going and growing?
I don't know. Competing with big guys is never fun. Now, here's the advantage. The advantage of smaller versus bigger. You got to look at the weaknesses of big. Big guys are generally not very flexible. Big guys don't move very quickly because they're big. So I would say that somehow or other you have to kind of constantly keep that in mind, that what I want to do is essentially play to the weaknesses, if I can, of the big box players. In other words, avoid their strengths because they got a lot of them, and find out what I can do to take advantage of their weakness. And generally, big is not easy to run, not easy to manage. They're very impersonal. So I think the personal touch it'd be an enormous advantage of a smaller guy versus a big guy. The involvement of the top people is important because you never see that in a big company because they're too far up. So I mean, there are ways to play it, but again, it's the category and it's how you construct your story. But I do think if you can focus on the weak points of these big guys, which they're there. I mean, a lot of them are run pretty well, but I think it's going to get back to service and things like that, which I think is very important. The service piece, because that's what big companies have a hard time with that, very hard time. Because they're so big. Okay. All right, guys, break time.
Mind racing? All kinds of thoughts. I keep thinking, I've got this image of a Far Side cartoon that I remember from a couple years ago. It's a classroom, elementary school, and there's a teacher standing in front of a child, and the child has an enormous head. And the child is saying to the teacher, "I want to go home. My head is full." We're not going to let you go home, okay? We're going to take a 20-minute break. Jack's going to come back, workshop with us some more. So take 20 minutes, come back, and we're going to workshop with Jack and take a little more time to learn what difference can do for all of us. See you in just a little bit.
Ladies and gentlemen, please make your way back to your seats for our workshop. Ladies and gentlemen, please make your way back to your seats for our workshop.
All set? Ladies and gentlemen, please direct your attention to the screen.
ABI means voice. What you see is you have an organization that has the ability to get things done, that can actually make a positive change in our environment. And I think that's important. for us. I mean, we need to have that voice for the business community, and the Iowa Association of Business and Industry does that for us.
ABI has the highest integrity that I've seen.
When there's ever a threat to business in the state from within, ABI is always there on the cusp to say, hey people, let's be aware of what's going on here. And ABI has done a fantastic job of doing that for us.
Well, they've been essential, and we travel all across the state. We go to all 99 counties, and from each one of the businesses that we've met with, they've indicated that they don't have a skilled workforce that they need. So they've been instrumental in really helping us define what it means for Iowa students to be career ready.
People and business and community leaders alike from Iowa tend to step up when there's issues. It's easy to say that people do that, but having come from an area where it was a little bit more difficult, it's real easy in Iowa. You can lean on people like ABI and the members there that are peers of mine.
ABI means collaboration. When there is a key issue, guess who's at the forefront? ABI.
One of the great pleasant surprises was the quality of the staff, the ABI, getting to know the individuals in the organization.
To me, ABI means connections. People buy from people they know, like, and trust. And the best thing that we can do is create forums for those Iowa business leaders to get together, form those relationships that hopefully down the road result in doing business with one another.
The first and foremost for me is the networking that you have access to. So I have access to the best and brightest business people, attorneys, insurance people in the state of Iowa.
ABI stands for advocacy. Advocacy for pro-growth, pro-business policies that'll help us achieve the goal of 200,000 jobs and 25% increase in family incomes in the great state of Iowa.
It means impact. 1,400 member companies and their company representatives come together, develop an agenda, and then achieve that agenda.
I am not aware of another association which offers the same opportunity to our employees to engage with their peers and counterparts, and offers such a broad understanding of the Iowa economy.
I think we have leadership not only in staff but in the chairs that have come before that really are giving this organization a vision for the future.
Well, ABI is power at the legislative level.
It's about voice amplification. As I'm looking at Iowa, looking at running a business, growing a business, how do I amplify my voice? And ABI gives me that amplification that otherwise I wouldn't have.
I was surprised to see how much people love this association. The members love it. It's not just something they pay dues to, it's something they are involved in. It makes it easy to get out of bed and come to work for these folks. So.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the president of Iowa ABI, Michael Ralston.
Good morning, everyone. I am Mike Ralston with the Iowa Association of Business and Industry, and let me join Todd and our friends at EO. We're so thrilled that you're all here today. We welcome you, and we're grateful that you took time out of your busy day to be with us. I need to do one thing before I go any further. You all know that programs like this aren't possible without a lot of hard work by a lot of people. There were a lot of people at EO that worked hard on this. There were people at ABI that worked hard on this, but two in particular, Holly Muggenberg and then Lisa Fox, who's in the room. Lisa's in the back, our Senior VP for Revenue and Programs, and so I hope you'll join me in thanking them. I'm not sure you get it from that video. We do a lot of different things at ABI. ABI is Iowa's oldest and largest statewide business organization. One of the things we're best known for is our annual Taking Care of Business Conference. We get about 1,500 people to that event every year. This coming June, it will be held in the Quad Cities, and our keynote speakers are Ken Blanchard and Patrick Lencioni. We hope you'll join us. You can go online and find out more. But here's the big deal. We're all here today to get some more terrific ideas from Jack. You're going to hear from Mike Wagner later. I asked Jack what I might say that might differentiate my own introduction of him. He said, keep it short, you'll sound smarter that way. But we are thrilled to have Jack Trout in Des Moines today. Jack Trout.
Okay, we're going to wrap it up with a couple of case studies that we're going to give you a chance to weigh on as to what you think should be done, and then I'll give you the answer. See, we'll see how close you come to doing the right thing for two different. And I brought two very different ones. One's an airline, and one is a tourism thing. So let's get going with the airline. Okay, I call this an opportunity for the number 2 Russian airline. I think you all know who number 1 is, right? Aeroflot. So here it is. The aviation market, it was opening up in Russia. Aeroflot is still the leader. But who's going to become number 2? Who will seize the opportunity? And this was a problem that I was involved in briefly. And so it's a terrific opportunity. In any category this big, to get a shot at becoming number 2 is, believe me, it's a big deal. All right, here's the idea. Aeroflot is Russia's old airline. And now we have a new alternative. Russia's new airline is a differentiating idea that can be preempted in the minds of the Russian public. In other words, here's an idea that's available. I mean, it's very straightforward, very simple. Now, credentials. Remember I talked about credentials. To establish this idea, the new airline must fly almost as many passengers as Aeroflot, number 1. To claim number 2, they must be the clear number 2 in passengers flown. So the question is, who's out there with these kinds of numbers? Best candidate, interesting enough, was a company called Siberia Airlines. You know, I mean, this was a big player in Russia, a regional player. And obviously they fly to a place that nobody wants to go to, right? Siberia. So that's not a big plus. But this was the player. So this was the deal. And interesting enough, this in 2003, Siberia flew 3.3 million passengers, which are first in terms of internal flights in Russia. Overall, they are second in total Russian air travel because Aeroflot had the lock on all the external flying around. So this was the situation. So your assignment, I'm going to give you this assignment. What should Siberia do in terms of marketing strategy that will put them in a position of being an alternative to Aeroflot? How do they become number 2? All right, that's the assignment. All right, folks. Now, in simple terms, what do you think they should do? This is Siberian Airlines has a shot at number 2. Anybody want to throw out a couple of potential ideas that are sort of obvious? Change the name. That is a very good strategy. That is a very good strategy. Now, what do you change it to is your next question. Anybody have some thoughts on that one? Someplace warm. Any other candidates? Well, okay. I mean, so really what you're saying is they could use a big name, right? Like Republic or something like that? Yeah, so I agree, and I think that's it. So in other words, in essence, what you're facing is, and we talked about this morning earlier, the name issue is a critical aspect to this thing. They have a terrible name, Siberia, and they have to replace it with as big a name as they can get their hands on. So I think that was on the table. So now you want to know what happened? So I said number 1, to become number 2, they cannot have a regional name. We've talked about that. They need a we fly everywhere name. Example, Federal Airlines. Somebody, I think I heard this, Russian Airways. This is kind of the name that they have to look at. And they must look and act differently than Aeroflot. In other words, if you're going to become the number 2, it's the Avis we try harder. You know, you got to do something a little bit different from Hertz. And essentially they must become, and it's a simple idea, a new airline for the new Russia. Because that's a natural idea, that's an obvious idea. It's a simple idea that's sitting there for the company that's going to step up and take advantage of it. So that was really what I told them to do. Did they do it? No. No, of course not. What happened? They hired a corporate identity firm in London, and what did they do? They came up with the name S7, which happens to be that was their industry computer designation. And then what did they do? They painted the names in a lime green color. S7, and there it is, guys. There it is. Terrible name. And I said, so the first question is S7 a name? Not really. It's a computer designation. So the answer, of course, is no. The S7 name's not a big but a small airline. Result is so what happened? People continued to call them Siberia or Siberian, which only so this reinforced the position of being a local airline. The number 2 position was still open. So in other words, in a way, I think you're absolutely correct. A new name, but it's got to be a new big name. And S7, of course, is not a big name. So simple story, but, you know, that's what happened. And, of course, there's even more bad news for Siberia. Putin has approved the creation of a second national airline by combining 5 companies called Air Union. Analysts predict it could replace Siberia as the country's number 2 carrier. When you're doing business in Russia, you have to deal with Putin. And Putin is basically a thug, but he's surrounded by a bunch of other thugs. So it is I call it the unmarketing country. You really can't do stuff in and it's a true story. I was working with an automobile dealer there, the largest imported dealer in the country, and in Moscow. And I said, well, your strategy is easy. Where a Russian goes to buy an imported car because you got all the numbers. And I'll never forget, the guy said to me, I can't say that. I said, why not? He said, I'll make me too visible. I said, too visible? He said, you got to be careful. You get too visible here, Putin's friends show up and take your business. That's what happened. So that's kind of what happens in Russia. So you don't want to do business there, guys. Okay. All right, that's story number 1. And I think, generally speaking, I think you're in the right direction on that one. Now I'm going to give you even a simpler story. Let's see how you do here. This is the Caribbean. We'll go to the Caribbean. And this is a destination story or tour. This is a country called Grenada. You might recall this. President Reagan invaded this place once. It was a silly thing to do, but he did. And it's a cute little island that's sitting way down at the bottom, which has a tourism problem. In other words, to tell you about Grenada, it's got 133 square miles, volcanic, mountains, small population, 94,000. Unemployment very high, 25–30%. Very agricultural, and tourism. Obviously, it's got to become much more important for these guys to survive down there. So this was the problem. Now, here was their slogan. They had a slogan called Grenada, Isle of Spice. What is that? Is that a meaningless slogan? Well, sort of. Sort of. Why did they call that? See, they grew cocoa, nutmeg, and mace was grown and processed in Grenada. And I said, gentlemen, no one's going to go to travel a great distance to see cocoa and mace and nutmeg grown and processed. Let's go watch the cocoa grow. It's not going to fly. So that was their problem. That was their problem. So how do you avoid, here's your problem, how do you avoid the just another island in the Caribbean problem? How do you reposition the competition? Here's a story where, they had to do this thing. Now, just to give you a little, what do they have to offer? Well, they have unspoiled countryside. Why is that? No tourists. Unspoiled beaches. Why is that? No tourists. And they have unspoiled natural parks. No tourists. And no tall buildings. No condos, no high rises. This is the #1 town down there. So no tall buildings. So in a way, we got a problem. We got to increase our tourism. We have essentially, it's an unspoiled place because of the lack of tourists. So here's your assignment. What should Grenada do in a situation where they have a large number of competitor islands with more money and a successful history as tourist destinations? What is the overriding strategy that they have to pursue? Now, this is a pretty simple problem, guys. So what would you do? Anybody have a suggestion as to what the strategy should be? Okay, we got one right here.
The unbeaten path.
What is it?
The
unbeaten path. Okay, that's an idea. Any other ideas? Give me that again. I missed you. Oh, a Kardashian? I'm not buying that one. Anybody got any other ideas? No, and remember, we're looking for a strategy, a simple strategy. Go ahead.
Make it a
secondary destination for a major destination. The problem with that idea is in the Caribbean, there is no secondary. It's major, I go there and I come home. There's not a big, it's not like Europe where you can do a couple of stops, you know, Amsterdam, Rome, stuff like that. That's a tricky deal. So it's usually, these are one-stop things. Any ideas out there?
It seems like the unbeaten path right over here by the soundboard. The unbeaten path idea, that seems like the most simple approach. It's the most unspoiled, untouched. It's the perfect place in the Caribbean. And it's a starting point for all the other islands. That's where you go first.
You're getting there. You're getting there. Any other thoughts? Escape, unplug. Well, peace and quiet. Well, that's true. No tourists. What is it now? That is the winner. Who was that? I can't see you. All right. Guess what? I'm just going to declare you the winner. You're absolutely correct.
That's just because he's old.
Yeah, he's my age. He knows what's going on. It's a question of repositioning the competition, making them essentially, if you have an unspoiled product, you want to essentially hang spoiled on them. And I think you're absolutely correct. And here's the answer. You should reposition the competition as competitive as being spoiled. Too many tourists. And essentially, here was the strategy. The Caribbean the way it used to be. And essentially, that was a very simple idea. Before all the tourists arrived, this is what the Caribbean was, unspoiled. No building is higher than a palm tree. Grenada, Caribbean the way it used to be. Because you go to most of these islands and they all have high rises. Waterfalls by nature, not man. This is not like Disney World. This is the Caribbean the way it used to be. Beaches untouched by developers. Grenada, the Caribbean the way it used to be. And essentially, to show you how powerful that idea was, this was an actual PR coup. This article ran not too long afterwards that we were dealing with them. And essentially, this is what I call the power of PR and positioning. And this is a story that said, hanging like a teardrop southern tip remains relatively untouched and wholly unspoiled by the evolution that's forever changed its sisters to the north. This is the Caribbean in the 1950s. Last big island where life goes on largely as it did before jetliners and baby boomers with credit cards began fluttering in. In other words, one of the things we didn't talk about, if you have a very good strategy, PR is a very powerful way to get it born, if you can get it out there, if you can get your story out there. Because this article pretty much was exactly what almost read like the marketing strategy that we were talking about for them. And that gives you enormous credentials, if you can pull it off. PR is advertising, all PR should be before any advertising. Because that's when your chances is to get stories. As soon as you start to promote it or advertise it, the PR world goes away on you. So that's, especially in this kind of a world. So that's the kind of thing. So that was it was pretty good. Class, you got one on the money, and not quite, almost there. So but this gives you a pretty good sense of really how you do this stuff, guys. You know, it's common sense. It's step back, see what you got, see what your competition is, and see what the problems are. And be careful of getting, and make sure you got the right name, which I guess was the big problem with Siberian, and the right strategy, which is essentially to hang spoiled on the other your competitors. So that in a nutshell are two interesting little stories, but I think it gives you a sense of how if you can just step back and don't get too complicated, try not to get burdened down with too many statistics and too much in the way of numbers. And what you're after is what I call a search of the obvious. Most powerful ideas are obvious ideas. Trouble is people don't trust obvious. They like complicated, but really what you're looking for is obvious and simple. That's your most powerful ideas. You know why? Because they're obvious to everybody else. That's why they work so well. Okay, any wrap-up questions and answers before I go back to New York? Anything else? Okay, we're right here. How does Grenada continue the unsplit? The answer is with some difficulty. In other words, when you can get spoiled with any success. And part of the problem with that strategy is you have to be very, very intent on protecting what you have. In other words, you can't allow high rises. You have to sort of say, no, you can only build a certain type of place. You really have to limit your success to some degree. In other words, you can't get too successful because you're right. The developers will move in and change everything. And then you're gone. Then you're just another island. So I think, like in everything else, once you have a strategy, sometimes protecting it, nurturing it, requires that you just can't fall in love with getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Because you're going to, especially a strategy like that, you will become spoiled very quickly. It will no longer be the Caribbean the way it used to be. So this is the program to get it going, but you're right. How do you manage it? Well, it's like AIM toothpaste. One idea, good tasting, now I want to be everything for everybody. Crash. Same deal. So managing that strategy would have been very hard. And it would have taken very sophisticated people to do that. That was the problem. You know, these islanders are not quite up to that kind of thing. Well, it's developers. It's greed. Kicks in. It's it's difficult. Yeah.
Take a place like Detroit.
Detroit. Oh, take a place. You take it.
But I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
It's an opportunity.
Yes, it is.
But no one's expecting much. So how would you approach that?
Well, yeah. How would you do Detroit? I have no easy answer on Detroit. They got to get out of bankruptcy first. I mean, that's the problem. I would say that you got to look at what you got to sell. And the question, what Detroit faces is what I call a repackaging problem. You almost have to see what you got and do a repackaging and then go out and sell it as a place to do business. That is essentially, that you can do business here because of these reasons. You have to make it a good place to do business because we have this, we have that. Whatever it is, it's a packaging issue. Because it's been, they need a new package. And I think because they have an opportunity. I mean, obviously, it was an opportunity once upon a time. They did a lot of business there. And the real question is, can you reconstitute that, and can they make it easier for people to do business? Do you have stuff we can offer? It's a big long-term marketing problem. But quite often, I tell people a lot of this stuff is packaging. You have to come up with a new package to sell it. But that's a tough nut. Any other questions? Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's a good question because in a way, as I said, PR is a very powerful way to build a brand if you can, or a company, whatever. And the reason is, it's not you talking about yourself, it's the press or somebody else, a third party, talking about you. The trick is, you have to construct a very powerful PR story for the PR people. You got to say, here's our story, and I think, and you got to work closely with them and say, now I want to frame this story in a way that will, that will encourage the press to write about it, or whoever else is you're trying to get stories on. And it's got to be an interesting story. It's got to be a hook to it. And a good PR person will be good at this kind of stuff. But you gotta work with them carefully on constructing a story that's very PRable. I mean, that Grenada story was a very simple story. You know, and they got some very good press on it because of that fact. But it has to be, you had to have the story to construct it before the PR people could run with it. That's correct. You got to make them a very integral part of the thing. Because look, you can have advertising people, you can have PR people, these are the messaging crowd. And so, but remember, PR has to come first. You're not going to get a lot of press once you're doing a lot of advertising. You know, in essence, the reason that Grenada got that press is because they weren't doing any advertising. There was a story there about what was going on, et cetera, et cetera. And so, in other words, that's where they were able to get. If they were running ads like that, it would have been impossible. They wouldn't have gotten that story. So that's why the PR people had to be very part of the story building. Look, marketing is good storytelling, guys. That's what it's all about. It's good storytelling. And essentially, you got the people involved with the storytelling have got to be part of this process of pulling together the story. Okay, you guys run with it, and then after you guys run with it, then we'll let the other people get into the game. That's what it comes down to. Not easy. One of the problems you're going to face is everyone's fighting over budgets. PR people want to protect their budget, advertising people, you know, it's always a money issue. So that's why you have to have the senior people have got to be laying out the ground rules here. They're going to have to say, here's the deal. So that we don't have the intramural fighting. Any other? All right. I think I filled up your heads. You all have big heads today. All I got to say is, guys, it's a lot tougher than it seems. This looks pretty easy when you go through this stuff. But if I can say, keep it simple and essentially keep it obvious and just don't overcomplicate things and really have a very strong sense of your competition. And believe me when I say that the top marketing person, and I'm saying this to very big companies, the top marketing person really is the CEO or the top person. They're the keepers of the brand, and they're the ones that they can keep all the intramural fighting from going on, et cetera. But they have to understand the strategy, and that's where they got to go. And that's the issue. So with that, I would wish you good night and good luck.
Never miss a meal. That's one of my core values. So part of our day-to-day together is
I didn't. Yeah. Well, they kept saying they're going to bring it up, and